Welcome to the Explainer. We're going to talk about something pretty incredible today, how one powerful idea could, well, topple kings, spark revolutions on two different continents, and totally reshape the Western world. This is basically the story of how we got from absolute rule to the world we live in now. Okay, so how does a scientific discovery lead to two world-changing revolutions? Let's get right into it. The answer is this amazing chain reaction that connects science, philosophy, and, yeah, war. And understanding this is really the key to seeing how we went from kings with total power to the kinds of governments most of us have today. So we're looking at a span of about 130 years here. It all kicks off with this single scientific paper in 1687. And that paper was like a spark. It was a spark of reason that just ignited this massive firestorm of change that burned all the way into the 1800s. And it all starts with one guy, Isaac Newton. See, in 1687, he publishes his universal law of gravitation. Now, what's so revolutionary about that? Well, it's how he did it. He used pure logical reason. He proved that the universe wasn't just some chaotic, random thing controlled by divine whims. No, it was a predictable system, a system governed by natural laws that anybody could figure out. And that was a total game changer. So after Newton, people started to think of the universe as this giant, predictable clock. And that, of course, led to a really big question. If nature has rules, shouldn't society have them too? And that, right there, is the core idea of the Age of Reason. It's this belief that we could use logic, reason, to fix all of society's problems, everything from education to how we govern ourselves. And this new way of thinking, well, it was dangerous. It led philosophers to start challenging the very foundation of European society, which was absolute monarchy, where kings had total unchecked power. These thinkers started asking, hey, maybe we can use reason to design a better, fairer system of government. And this kicked off a huge debate about what people are even like at their core. On one side, you had Thomas Hobbes. He basically said people are selfish and you need a powerful absolute ruler to keep everyone from descending into chaos. But then you have John Locke, and his ideas are so important for this story, who had a totally different take. He thought people were basically reasonable, and that everyone is born with natural rights. And for Locke, a government's only job is to protect those rights. And if it doesn't, well, he argued, then the people have the right to rebel. Okay, so then Baron de Montesquieu comes along, and he's focused on a really practical problem. How do you stop a government from becoming a tyranny? His solution was inspired by what he saw in England. You separate the government's power into three different branches. The legislative makes the laws, the executive enforces them, and the judicial interprets them. This separation of powers was designed so that no one person or group could ever get total control. And then there's this quote. It just perfectly captures Rousseau's really radical idea. He took Hobbes's whole theory and just flipped it on its head. He argued that people are born good, but it's society and its institutions that corrupt them. For Rousseau, government wasn't some contract between you and a king. No, it was a social contract between the people themselves, and it was supposed to reflect the general will of the majority. All right, so we've got all these big ideas floating around. Now let's see what happens when they jump off the page and into the real world. Our first stop is the American colonies, where all of these theories are about to get put to the ultimate test. You see, for about 150 years, Britain had pretty much left the American colonies to do their own thing. But then, after a really expensive war with France, that all changed. The British government started imposing all these acts and taxes. And for the colonists, who had been reading guys like Locke and Montesquieu, this felt like a huge violation of their rights. I mean, they were being taxed without their consent, with no representation in Parliament whatsoever. So things were getting really tense, and it all finally boiled over. British soldiers marched out to seize weapons from the colonists, but they were met by the Minutemen, this local militia that was ready to fight at a moment's notice. And there, at Lexington and Concord, a shot was fired. We still don't know who fired first, but that was it. The American Revolutionary War had begun. And this is the moment where all that philosophy becomes real action. The Declaration of Independence, it's not just a breakup letter with England. It's basically an Enlightenment essay. When Thomas Jefferson wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, that's a direct echo of John Locke. The colonists were making a philosophical argument. King George III had broken the social contract, and that gave them the right to rebel. Now, the colonists didn't do this alone. They couldn't have. Their victory at the Battle of Saratoga was a huge turning point. It proved to the world they actually had a shot at winning. That convinced France, and then later Spain and the Netherlands, to jump in and help them. And that international support was absolutely critical in turning the tide against the massive British Empire. So, inspired by what happened in America, and ironically drowning in debt from helping the Americans, France was up next. But the French Revolution, well, it was going to be way more radical, way more complex, and a lot more bloody. And this chart really shows you the ticking time bomb at the heart of French society. It was split into three groups called estates. The first two, the clergy and the nobles, were a tiny percentage of the population, but they had almost all the wealth and paid basically zero taxes. And the third estate? That was everybody else. They carried the entire tax burden and had absolutely no political power. It was just an unsustainable system. So by 1789, France is completely bankrupt, and the price of bread, the main food for the poor, had shot through the roof. For the starving people in Paris, this was the last straw. Angry mobs stormed the Bastille, which was this old medieval prison that to them symbolized the king's oppressive rule. And that single act of defiance, that was the spark that lit the fuse of the French Revolution. But the beautiful ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity just fell apart really, really fast. The revolution descended into chaos and paranoia. This radical group called the Jacobins, led by a guy named Maximilien Robespierre, they seized control. They created this thing called the Committee of Public Safety, and for one terrifying year, they unleashed what we now call the Reign of Terror. And just look at this number. It shows you how brutal and out of control things got. The guillotine, which was invented to be a more humane form of execution, became this horrifying symbol of political terror. And it wasn't just the king and queen who were executed. Thousands upon thousands of regular citizens, people who were just suspected of being enemies of the revolution, were sent to their deaths. So out of all this chaos, all this bloodshed, one man emerges, one figure who would rise up to dominate not just France, but pretty much all of Europe, a brilliant, incredibly ambitious, and totally ruthless military general named Napoleon Bonaparte. And this quote, it just perfectly sums up Napoleon. He saw a total power vacuum in the chaotic French government. So in 1799, he staged a coup and took over. Then, 5 years later, he dropped all pretense of democracy. He didn't ask for power. He literally took the crown from the Pope and put it on his own head, declaring himself emperor. So much for the Republic. Napoleon is such a complicated figure. His legacy is a total paradox, as you can see here. On the one hand, he actually locked in some of the revolution's biggest goals. His Napoleonic Code guaranteed legal equality for all men, and his armies spread these new, liberal ideas all across Europe. But on the other hand, he was a dictator, an absolute ruler who plunged the entire continent into constant, bloody wars just to feed his own ambition. In the end, that ambition was his downfall. He made a disastrous decision to invade Russia in 1812, and it just completely destroyed his massive army. His enemies saw that he was weakened, and they all ganged up on him. In 1815, at the famous Battle of Waterloo, the British and Prussian armies, led by the Duke of Wellington, finally defeated him for good. His dream of a grand French empire was over. So what's the big takeaway from this whole incredibly turbulent era? Well, it kind of comes back to that last question, doesn't it? It shows us that while armies can win battles and emperors can definitely seize crowns, it's the powerful new ideas about rights, reason, and who should hold power that have the real ability to turn the entire world upside down.